Hello and good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, or wherever you're listening to this. This is the fifth edition of Breaking Barriers Talks 2, but it's a different one. Today I'm speaking with David Noyes, and not before an event, but after an event. David spoke at our launch of the Trauma in Mind report on Tuesday, and I'm really thrilled that he's been able to give up 10 or 15 minutes of his time this morning to develop on some of those thoughts. So we can have a one-on-one with him. David, really thrilled to speak to you for the second time this week. Would you mind just introducing yourself a little bit to the people?
No, that's very kind, George. Thank you very much. Then thanks for the opportunity to talk. My name's David Noyes. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Solent NHS Trust, where I've been Chief Operating Officer for around the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And throughout that time, Breaking Barriers have worked a lot with your trust. As I say, Tuesday was the launch of the report Trauma in Mind. Now that's the culmination of potentially over a year's worth of investigation and partnership with your organisation. How do you think, looking at it now, how do you think the report has helped Solent's approach to dealing with veterans?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really helpful, George. It has either confirmed for us our line of thinking and our sort of conceptual approach to the way that we were approaching this really important element of our work, or it's opened, or in some areas has opened our eyes to new ways of doing the business, and to try and shape our services to make it as effective as it can be. And what for us is such an important space, such an important element of our society that we really want to make a massive difference to, and help the veterans community, particularly obviously those struggling with mental health issues. And so the report, with all that it helps us with in pointing to, I think maybe particularly importantly, our approach, which is very much a partnership approach with the voluntary sector organisations with veterans' interests absolutely at heart. So we're in a close partnership with Walking with the Wounded and All Call Signs in the delivery of our high intensity veterans mental health services, where we're taking the lead across the southeast region. So the report really helped us with that, and all of the thinking about the importance for people to be able to interact with colleagues who have lived experience, people who have walked a few miles in the same sort of boots, can really relate to some of the experiences that our veterans have. And that's the power that colleagues from All Call Signs and Walking with the Wounded give us. In Solent, like many NHS providers, we've got a wealth of deep, highly committed, brilliantly expert professionals in the mental health field. But by adding the added dimension of veterans to do sort of peer support and early intervention, trauma-informed and veterans-aware interventions and training for people, is a really powerful mix, I think. And the model that we've developed seeks also to intervene early, to try and catch people by using a networked approach, almost franchising the Military Mental Health Alliance model that we've developed in Portsmouth and are expanding to the Hampshire Isle of Wight area, where there's no wrong door. Right, there's a host of really excellent, highly dedicated professional people trying to help the veterans community. By networking up, we can try and get people signposted to the right intervention as early as possible, and get people to talk to them and support them and coordinate their pathway through both them and their networks, really their families and their friends around them, to really make effective early interventions and help people in the best possible way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. You mentioned a couple of things there, David, that I'd just like to touch on. The first of which was that you referenced some of the work that your trust does prior to Breaking Barriers' involvement. And I think I'd just like to say that made our job easier and more engaging and more interesting, to be able to work with an organisation and a location that clearly has that fundamental commitment to the cause that we're looking at.
Sure.
You also said something really interesting. You said it's helpful to have people who walked a few miles in those shoes. I think that's doing a bit of a disservice. You've had 28 years in the Navy. I think that's right, David. So you've walked probably more than just a few miles. And I think, you must know colleagues from around the country in similar roles to you now, few of which I'm guessing have the experience and the background that you do. So I think with your current role, how does your background help you navigate the problems that you see, particularly around veterans' mental health, of course?
Yeah, that's a kind question, George. As you rightly say, it helps me by giving me, an insight into the culture of the services and the armed forces, and the way that people think and react. And having had, as you say, quite a long time. I served 28 years in the Navy, and slightly unusually, towards the end of my career, I was seconded from the Navy to the Army, to the British Army, and spent 18 months working with 101 Brigade, which was fantastic, and that included a 6-month tour during the Afghan conflict. So I've got slightly unusually a bit of experience in what life looks like from that perspective as well. It's a very different feel, and I reflected at the launch meeting on Tuesday when I was thinking about this whole space. I vividly remember things can be the same but very differently, but very different. I can vividly remember at the age of sort of 19 or 20, quite very early in my naval career, I was serving in the Persian Gulf in a ship, and we were engaged during the height of the Iran-Iraq War. The Persian Gulf was, extremely kinetic at the time. There's lots of activity going on, and our job at the time was to escort British flag tankers up through the Straits of Hormuz and up past Bahrain into Kuwait to load and unload and back out again. And I vividly remember the feel of sailing through what we knew at the time were mined waters, particularly around the coast of Bahrain, and how that felt when we were operating in those very difficult, dangerous environments for days on end. For a great period of time. I was a young fella at the time, but equally, when I was in Afghanistan, I spent some time out, as one would, with the guys, finding out what life was like for them, and walking, thinking, you never knew what your next step would bring you necessarily. So it was equally terrifying, really, equally terrifying, but felt very different. It felt very different. The time scale was different, but the feel of being in a ship for days on end with an almost, it's very difficult to describe, but an almost monotonous and regular threat of violence that could happen at any moment, versus walking across a piece of ground with equally each step you took it could have been a very nasty outcome, but a very different feel. But those experiences really shape your life and how you feel about things. But that kind of helps me understand a lot of different perspectives of veterans and the different experience that they've had, and puts it into context. And I think that plays to that thing we were talking about a moment ago about people with lived experiences find it, it gives you an insight which is almost impossible to replicate unless you've lived that life.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to hear you recite those memories that must be, if you don't mind me saying, almost a quarter of a century ago. You can recite them so vividly, and you can describe how you felt, not just what you saw. And to me, what I'm hearing there is just how important getting the feedback of the lived experience is. This doesn't leave you, and the depth of evidence that can provide for future service is really invaluable. I know in our piece of work, we dealt with over 126 individual pieces of lived experience feedback, and I know that was something that we thought was really valuable, and hopefully it will prove so in the recommendations. As well as the lived experience, one of the points of interest with our report, one of the points that provided the most diverse range of discussion, was whether or not we ought to be treating the veterans community as a separate entity, whether their experiences are unique and so different that they cannot be integrated into the experiences of civilian population. Now, we began to touch on that. We began to look at people in blue light services who might be experiencing trauma and trying to see whether we could draw some lines. I think, you know, we are unfortunately of a year that has taken the lives of tens of thousands of people due to a virus, and frontline health workers, care home staff will have seen and felt traumatic experiences. So perhaps we need to be thinking into the future about how we're going to deal with an increased pressure on trauma-related mental health services. I don't know. But what do you think? Do you think the lessons of this report, which are deliberately geared towards the veterans and the armed forces community, do you think they're transferable? And what do you think about a trauma-informed approach across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think the principles and the concepts of this approach are absolutely transferable, George. I do think as we just discussed, really, the experiences of service people are, I mean, they are different. They are not necessarily unique, but they are different when your life, your own existence is absolutely under threat, or you're certainly under threat of very, very serious injury, and the sort of things, the operations you're doing, the sort of things that you're doing are very different. But I think the principles and concepts, and the important bit about people having lived experience and being able to relate does transfer. And I think, the area you highlight, the blue light services, I would say that, the same but different, right? I was explaining to a colleague of yours actually earlier on. I served for, as you said, quite a long time in the Navy, 28 odd years. But by no means was all of that. By no means was that all of that in sort of conflict or combat conditions. Probably around 2 years in total. Whereas people, colleagues from the ambulance service or the police service or fire and rescue, they can be dealing with extraordinarily difficult traumatic experiences, day in, day out, really, for almost all of their working lives, when they're in the front line, which must have sadly take a toll, must have an impact. So I think I think they are naturally a different cohort, and we would need to think about how we would approach that. But I think in principle, absolutely, I think this does point us very usefully to an area of work that we're certainly very interested in developing in the future, because I think it is trauma is certainly not confined solely to the armed forces. It's been very much in focus for our country since the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. We've been in conflict for the last 20 years pretty much. But yeah, absolutely, I think there are wider lessons for us to take forward and adapt to make our services really effective and interact with people appropriately. Yeah,
I think that's right. I really do. David, you're a very busy man, but a man with some fascinating insight. We're extremely grateful to have heard it not once but twice this week, and particularly in this one-on-one session. I've sort of kept you for about 10-15 minutes, and I won't keep you for much longer. All I will say is, for anyone listening, the report, the PowerPoint slides that were presented at the event, and the video links to some of the other presentations that we have will be at the bottom of this video. David, it leaves me to say thank you again so much. It's always fascinating to speak to you, and I hope you keep well.
Thanks so much, George. Really good to talk to you.
Cheers, David. Thanks. Bye-bye.